Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Incident Management Risks Associated with Food Safety Outbreaks. With food recalls seemingly becoming more and more frequent with each passing month, it is increasingly important for food and beverage companies to have trained, competent incident management response teams ready to respond at a moment's notice. How a food company chooses to respond to food safety risk, incident responses, or a consumer crisis goes a long way in determining its business and individual executive liabilities. Unfortunately, incident management and crisis management mean different things to different people. As a result, this webinar is designed to define the differences between risk management, incident management, and crisis management. Properly executed incident management can go a long way toward preventing a crisis from developing and save a company's brand value and financial impact. On the other hand, poor incident management policy and response process can create significant consumer health and safety risks, some life-threatening. It is understood that the implementation of a risk management program does not always prevent an incident or a crisis, but the goal should be zero tolerance. A food company has broad legal vulnerability when plaintiff attorneys can demonstrate absentee or poorly developed incident management business processes. Food safety incidents can be caused by food-related issues like contaminated food, chemical residues, foreign objects, and other things. Safety can also be compromised by the effects of natural disasters, power plant accidents, war, and resource depletion. And with increased foreign trade and imports into the U.S., the federal government is holding food companies accountable for incident management at foreign supplier locations. However, a food company can defend itself through a detailed governance of a risk management policy that defines incident management team roles, responsibility, and response priorities. It can also demonstrate team response training to what-if scenarios, internal and external communication pathways, alert systems, team briefings, team response activity documentation, and other items. So whether you work as a defense or plaintiff attorney, this webinar has been constructed to equip you with valuable insight and food safety response steps to help your clients win cases. The presenter for today's program is Dr. Darrel Suderman. Dr. Suderman is the president of the Food Technical Consulting and has worked for food manufacturer and leading restaurant chains for over 20 years. For the last 7 years, Dr. Suderman has served as an expert witness and consultant for both plaintiff and defense attorneys throughout the United States. Dr. Suderman received his Bachelor of Science and Master's of Science degrees in agricultural education and his PhD in food science from Kansas State University. He holds 2 patents, co-authored a food processing book, and has written over 40 peer review and trade magazine articles and white papers. He has worked in research and development, quality assurance, and food safety for many of the leading restaurant chains, including KFC, Boston Market, Church's Chicken, Quiznos, Captain D's, Chick-fil-A, and Wendy's International. In addition, Dr. Suderman co-founded Business IQ as a business intelligence IT consulting company, which has been accepted as an official partner of SAP software. A few of his clients have included Foster Farms, Jennie-O Turkey Store, Golden Plum Poultry, Johnsonville Sausage, E&J Gallo Winery, Tyson's Food, and Organic Valley. We will take 2 question and answer breaks during today's program. If you have a question, please use the chat or Q&A feature located on the right-hand side of the screen, and we will get you up and running as quickly as possible if you're having any problems hearing us. I have a couple of messages. I apologize. But we will take 2 question and answer breaks during today's program. If you have a question, you can use the chat feature or Q&A feature, and we'll get your question answered as quickly as we can. Tomorrow morning, we'll send out an email with a link to the archived recording of this program, and we do ask that you take time to fill out the survey that will appear on your screen after today's program is over. Now I invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy. I'm going to turn the presentation over to our distinguished guest, Dr. Darrel Suderman. Darrel, the program is now all yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank everyone for giving me the opportunity to educate you further on food safety, a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and a passion of mine. I selected this topic because food safety is the most discussed topic in the food industry, second only to business intelligence, performance analytics. I say this because CEOs are still driven first to meet profitability and efficiency goals, but the new Food Safety Modernization Act legislative regulations are taking dead aim to the core of the food and manufacturing business. Unfortunately, most CEOs farm it to underlings because they don't quite understand it. Just a few things about me that kind of already been mentioned. My whole background has basically been in the restaurant business and research and development, quality assurance, food safety, and working in food manufacturing plants. It's a very unique blend of experiences. The qualifications are one thing. The experience is far more important. My perspective today is influenced by the fact that I have written ingredient and product specifications, written food process specifications, managed restaurant chain food safety and quality assurance programs, and helped the largest organic food company identify and select the electronic specification and certification document management program. Developed what they call SSOP, or Standard Sanitation Operating Procedures, in food processing plants that are used before every production startup each day, and as well as developed detailed software solutions that have led product recalls, and I'll go through a couple of those later in this presentation today. I recently reviewed a white paper by a multi-billion-dollar software company, Siemens, and they offered no specific solutions. In other words, it is still really hard for software companies that try to sell companies with different electronics IT software solutions. They will talk about having a food defense program, a defense coordinator, or a risk manager, but that's about it. So we'll try to get you fairly equipped. I've also written several TASA papers and presented the following webinars that I've listed here. The first one was Protecting Food and Beverage Recipe and Process Ownership. Second was Emerging Issues in Food Product Litigation. The next webinar in 2012 was the Top 5 Consumer Liability Risks the Public Ignores. And the most recent one was a Public Safety Liability for Mobile Food Retailers and Quick Serve Restaurants. This was an article that I wrote for Trial Lawyer magazine, so you may have run across that previously. I've segmented today's webinar into the following areas. First, we'll talk about the different definitions of different terms that are used in incident and risk management. Second would be incident causes and incident prevention. Third, we'll discuss incident management processes. Fourth would be team training. Fifth would be process verification and review, followed by food category incident risk, personal case studies, plaintiff and defense gotchas, and conclusions. Recent outbreaks have led to financial impacts. In 2008, the U.S. tomato growers, wholesalers, and retailers in Florida lost an estimated $250,000 when they could not sell their product after an investigation of possible salmonella outbreak linked to their product, resulting in a national health advisory. Consumer confidence in the safety of tomato products eroded, while food safety practices on farms and throughout the supply chain were called into question. Other producers were also affected by this health advisory and found themselves answering questions about growing conditions, the safety of inputs, including water, handling, and distribution of products. Foodborne safety issues have caused sick customers, consumer deaths, brand quality erosion, and financial ruin. An incident is an event that could lead to the loss of or disruption to an organization's operations, services, or functions. If not properly managed, an incident can escalate into emergency, crisis, or disaster. Incident management is the process of limiting potential disruption caused by a food safety event, followed by a return to business as usual. But before we dig into the primary topic of the webinar, incident management, we need to understand the difference between a few terms. A few of those terms are risk, incident, crisis, management, product recall, to name a few. How does an incident vary from a product recall? First, a product recall is a response to a pre-existing incident that may have already escalated to a crisis. So that's a response into something that's already happened. The management process of an incident management and a production recall may be very similar, but in both cases, a disciplined process is the key to a successful de-escalation, and I'll emphasize that word, de-escalation of a food safety risk. Preventing the escalation of a food safety threat or reality is really what we are talking about today. It's all about prevention. However, from your standpoint, it's all about best practices, prevention, training, so that you can find holes in the processes. These pictures kind of speak for themselves and demonstrate to us that failed incident management processes can result in sick or dying customers, which we don't want, or failed businesses that go out of business forever. I want to talk a little bit about food safety outbreak incident management. Food safety recalls are continuing their numerical growth, as well as their financial hit to food processors. As the value of food continually increases, so does the cost of removing the food from the supply chain. Ask a couple questions here. Will food company, insurance companies start demanding changes to reduce their financial exposure? And two, what can food companies do to mitigate financial risk and prevent consumer sickness and death? I haven't heard much talk about pushback from the insurance carriers, but it makes me wonder why and when it will happen. I personally believe that it would be wise to send an expert to a food manufacturing client to assess their food safety plans in relationship to the mean of food companies and the mean of industry best practices. Why gamble the financial risk of an unknown? I predict this is going to happen more often with insurance carriers in the future. Getting to some specific terms. Food safety risk. This is a potential, I want to emphasize potential, that a chosen action or activity, including the choice of inaction, will lead to a loss or an undesirable outcome. A food safety incident is an occurrence of seemingly minor importance that can lead to food crisis. And a food safety crisis is any event that is or is expected to lead to an unstable and dangerous situation affecting an individual, group, community, or society. Let's see how these terms kind of progress in a food outbreak, so to speak. Risk management in simple terms, this relates to the practices designed to prevent a situation from occurring. If we were then to look at an incident management, it would be a situation that has occurred and it's time to limit the damage by stopping the incident before it becomes a crisis. Sometimes you may have heard the term heightened incident. This is a situation that is escalated to a near crisis. And lastly, the crisis management is the point the damage has occurred or is continuing to occur, and the response has to be swift to clean it up and in some cases limit it. In other words, a heightened incident. Some causes of incidents. Food safety incidents occur every day, but most are managed before they become a crisis, thank goodness. Incident causes can be categorized into food-related, non-food-related, and man-related. Examples of some food-related incidences would include contamination, foreign objects found in the food, allergens, chemical residues, while non-food-related incidents could include natural disasters, floods, fires, and man-made ones could be power shutdowns, war, etc. Again, food safety incidents and risk arise from a wide range of options. I want to talk about a couple non-food incidents examples, and the first was the 2011 Japanese tsunami, where food makers faced raw material contamination as well as potential product contamination due to damaged manufacturing plants and supply chain infrastructure. The Japanese tsunami represented a macro version of the traditional product recall. During a recall, most manufacturers isolate food products prior to and after which the food contamination occurred. The same process needed to occur on a grand supply chain scope from the moment the tsunami occurred to ensure all inbound ingredients and outbound products were safe and accounted for. I haven't heard about this, but I'm sure this will occur in the food industry more, where people not only look at the food on a production line, both before and after an incident, but on their whole supply chain. I think it's absolutely critical that that happen. Another incident was the 2011 Shiga toxin-producing E. coli, or STEC, outbreak in Germany. This caused 2,000 cases of foodborne illnesses and over 30 deaths. Believe it or not, the culprit was simply freshly sprouted cucumber seeds. I'd like to talk a little bit about food safety incident breaches in food manufacturing plants and what some of those breaches could be. I've been through a lot of food processing plants, worked in a lot of plants, and most of the time, in recent years, food companies have built perimeter fences around their food processing plants. When I started my career 20 years ago, well, even that wasn't the case, but there are some that are worth investigating with your clients. One would be the perimeter of the food manufacturing plant. An unauthorized intruder could breach or check-in station. Most times I go to food plants now, I have to turn over a copy of my driver's license, and then it's returned to me once I check out of the facility. That doesn't happen in all cases. The second opportunity for a breach of food safety would be the water supply or water purification ponds. And I'll give you an example of this as one of the largest poultry companies in the United States is at their facility in Alabama about a year ago, and they actually take all the water that's used in the processing plant and put it through a series of purification ponds that probably go on for a good mile, where a lot of a lot of different water species of plants or everything grow. And this is an opportunity where there could be a terror response where someone contaminates that water. Another could be avian and rodent breach of internal grounds of facilities, where these animals will get into the inside of the plant through open doors or hanging curtains. I recently worked on a case in California and Texas on this, where this was exactly the problem that we were working to resolve. And then food distribution trucks without proper paper documentation can be a breach of security, as well as internal plant contamination and micro-contamination of produce fields. So to truly manage an incident from escalating, we need to be able to identify the food security breaches. This shows a picture of produce workers, looks like Salinas, California, as I see the mountains in the background there. Produce is probably the highest risk category in the world for produce contamination. And one of the things that makes it especially difficult is that E. coli can actually embed itself into irrigation water, and then the lettuce plants can actually draw that water up into them as a plant, and E. coli organisms are still live and active and can get a consumer sick. We talked about birds contaminated produce, but it can happen through humans too. And this is a picture of personal hygiene and sanitation field restroom facilities. And if employees just don't wash their hands properly and practice good hygiene, it's just an easy way for lettuce to be contaminated also. Some of the food safety prevention practices that are based on Food Safety Modernization Act and TASA principles is the issuance of guidance documents for managing risk reduction from the most significant foodborne contaminants, and also establishing minimal standards for the safe production and harvesting of fruits and vegetables based on known safety risks. The federal government is positioned to inflict great harm in corporate closures through the power granted through the Food Safety and Modernization Act. They can close down a plant and do it immediately, and that's a big cornerstone of the Food Safety Modernization Act. It also requires that food importers perform risk-based foreign supplier verification activities to verify that the imported food is produced in compliance with applicable requirements related to the hazard analysis and standards for produce safety and is not adulterated or misbranded. Some of the incident management best practices include development of incident management plan based on a tiered consumer health safety protection, and secondly, financial impact. The second best practice is conduct regular incident management dry runs. Success is measuring when incident management prevents a crisis from starting. And we'll talk about product recalls also, but it's very similar to that. And third, best practice is incident management plan that meets Food Safety Modernization Act mandates. Benchmarking for success begins with identifying best practices and then taking it up a notch or two. We're going to be talking a little bit more about incident management teams and processes, and all this slide shows us is the potential structure of a incident management team that a food company should have in place. Essentially what you'll see here, and we'll continue to talk about, is people in different key positions with the company that all have input to make sure that the incident is properly managed. And as you can see on the right-hand side, you can have a public information officer, a food safety officer, a liaison officer, a finance administrator, a logistics or supply chain chief, a planning section chief, and someone that runs operations of the company. One of the things that a team will do, an incident management team, is to create an incident management process, which would include at the beginning an incident identification, then the incident analysis, the evaluation of the incident, the treatment implementation, and then a monitoring and review of whether that incident was properly managed or taken care of. There's a four-phase incident management process that I've kind of adapted for my own business, and that is crisis management in the food industry has four phases, beginning with prevention, which is employing good food safety culture and including staying current on risk factors. Preparation, which is proactively planning for a problem and monitoring the public discussion risk. Management, which is implementing the plan using multiple messages and media. And lastly, recovery, which is reassessing risk exposure and telling the story of changes. Crisis management begins, as I mentioned before, with prevention, the first of four phases, which food safety culture is how an organization or group approaches food safety risk in thought and behavior, and is the component of a larger organizational structure. Creating a culture of food safety requires application of the best science with the best management and communication systems. Preparation is the second of four phases, in proactively planning for a problem and monitoring public discussion risk. All is included in preparation. Being prepared to speak openly about risk reduction strategies and demonstrating risk management practices can reduce financial impacts and allow public trust to be regained quicker than if a firm or industry had not planned for it. The third of 4 phases is management, the implementation of the plan using multiple messages and media. Following 2006 E. coli 0157 in spinach and 2008 Salmonella St. Paul and serrano peppers, news spread throughout the internet in an unprecedented fashion. Producers, processors, retailers, and regulators of agricultural products must now pay particular attention to evolving discussion and engagement in the public discussion concourse while the crisis is occurring. A firm or industry that is not forthcoming with information of who knew what, when, and what discussions were being made sets itself up for a loss of trust because media and internet discussion goes towards these questions. And I noticed just recently, if you've been following some of the story, mainly in the Wall Street Journal, about how Yum brands, specifically Kentucky Fried Chicken, has been struggling with communicating some of the public safety issues that they've been going through in China. And I'm sure that a lot of that internal discussion on their part is how forthcoming should we be with the particular interests of the Chinese people. And I just think it needs to be honesty from the word go up front, but it's something that KFC has certainly been struggling with recently, and a good article to follow. I've been trying to pass it along a little bit on my blogs, or my Twitter, but it's just something to keep an interest in. And then the last phase of incident management process recovery, and this is the reassessing risk, exposure, and telling the story of changes. A firm employing the best crisis management practices starts a recovery phase as soon as notified of a problem. Publicly, producers must address the problem, apologize to affected individuals, and reach out to the middle about risk reduction changes. It is best to establish a dialogue with groups and demonstrate the organization's openness and commitment to public safety and health. And at this point, we'll take a pause for any questions that you might have.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Darrel. We have a couple questions that have come in that I'd like to address, but I'd also like to invite all the attendees to submit their questions through the chat or Q&A feature found on the right-hand side. Darrel, we have a question here that asks, does the FDA or USDA or any other third party provide incident management response protocols or guidelines for food manufacturers?
Now, that's an excellent question, but unfortunately, they don't. At least not that I'm aware of right now. So what it means is that each food company has a responsibility to develop their own response protocols and guidelines and compare it to other food companies and try to benchmark against best practices.
And to follow up on that question, is there a one-size-fits-all policy, or does each policy need to be custom and customized for the company?
One of the things that I recommend is customization for individual companies based on the type of products they have. We'll get into this a little bit further in our workshop, but for instance, a company that sells mainly dry mixes, that could be dry sauce mixes and other things. A company like McCormick Spice Company or Griffith Laboratories in Chicago, companies that I've quite familiar with and worked with, they have a lower incident or lower likelihood of food safety risks due to microorganisms versus a produce company that's out in Salinas, California, and they're maybe processing broccoli, produce, carrots out of the soil and various things like that. So I really do think there has to be some customization.
Okay, and in your experience, where is the most risk? Like, what causes most of these incidents? Is it lack of oversight, lack of training? What do you find causes most of these incidences?
Well, there's probably two responses I could give you. In some instances, food safety happens probably by accident. I keep using the incident or the example of produce fields in California, and that is that a bird can just defecate while flying over a field of lettuce, and it could either get directly onto the plant and have E. coli in it, or it could be in the irrigation water. So there's not a lot a company can do from that standpoint, although they are doing tracking and tracing to specific fields, and they're relocating produce fields X number of feet from a dairy processor. So they're trying to do steps like that, but there's some things you just can't manage, and then what you have to do is to begin to look at your practices for food cleaning, sanitation, once it gets cut and goes into your processing plant and before it goes into packaged salads, so to speak. So some of it you can control, and the others you just need to have best practices in place so that it remains an incident at worst and doesn't get into a crisis situation.
Okay, great. I do not see any other questions in the queue, but we will take a Q&A break at the conclusion of the presentation. So if you do have a question or a question comes to your mind during the second part of the presentation, please don't hesitate to enter it into the chat or Q&A feature, and we'll address it at the end of the program. So, Darrel, why don't you continue on with the presentation of content? We have a question here from John that I'd like to address before we get started with the second part. John asked, when you say it's in the plant, do you mean it's on the plant? Can you specify that?
Actually, what I'm referring to, it would be the produce, for example, that's come out of the field and has been in the holding area before it goes into the processing plant and gets placed onto the production line where it begins the washing process and to get all the contaminants off and to clean up the product as much as possible. So what I'm really referring to is a product as it gets placed onto the assembly line to go through the washing and the cleaning and the grading processes.
Okay, excellent. Why don't we continue on with the presentation, Darrel?
We'll start with talking about the risk management team responsibilities. We talked about forming teams and who might be on those teams, but it must be a multidisciplined team with the following departments: supply chain management, and sometimes that can mean purchasing people. Sometimes it can actually be people that get involved with demand planning or supply planning. And it should also have quality assurance, legal, communications, IT people, insurance representatives, and operations. In other words, as many discipline areas within your company that can be included, the better the team and the more effective the team is going to be, because it's going to have a lot of perspective, people from different departments raising issues that are of a concern to them. And it must establish team ground rules, role responsibilities, and ownership of the following tasks, such as food safety risk, or the potential for food to be affected and put consumers at risk must be defined. Then legislation. In 2005, the European Union has required incidents to be reported to the EU Rapid System Alert for food and feed. And right now, this is something that we do not have as a requirement in the U.S. Inter risk management team responsibilities include the development of a risk management policy and process safeguards. Second, to define the role and responsibilities for categorizing and managing the food safety risk and must approve all outside communication. Third, the team leader or designate must document meeting minutes. And some of this documentation gets back to legal risk of not having it documented. At least that's what I think you as attorneys ought to be looking at is, was it documented? What type of information is there? What did they leave out is probably the thing you want to look for. And then establish a robust team alert system and a common communication venue, and then to develop a team training program for that. Some of the process management for incident and outbreak would be identify as many possible causes as you can think of when the team meets. And then to identify, from a process management approach, information resources such as suppliers, customers, police, government, and other internal information. And then third, to set up information gathering protocol and ways to capture it and document it. In other words, how to get the information and then how to document and make it quickly accessible to others on the team. And eventually, in a lot of situations, there's probably going to be someone from the FDA showing up, and that information will have to be fully disclosed to the FDA agent when he shows up if it turns into a crisis. And fourth would be the alert system to notify relevant personnel of an incident outbreak. And then information briefing, where team members' responsibilities to gather information. And six would be full team briefings and centralization of key information. 7 would be identify a team administrator and then implement different team actions. So it's always good to have a very effective team leader. Now that could be someone that's on the team that is in charge of the supply chain, and it always helps if that person has experience in product recalls so that they can coordinate the efforts of everyone else on the team. If we look at kind of a team checklist, what the team needs to do is to identify additional resources and support that are needed, to identify major stakeholders and potential issues that could be kind of making the incident much more challenging and destructive to the food company. Then to identify triggers that could escalate the situation. Fourth would be to identify communication strategies of concern, control, or commitment, and then have a handover transition and a stand-down checklist. This would all help the team be more effective in addressing an incident to become a tragedy. The next area is training. And training is always, in my mind, synonymous with preparation. And that's why you do training in corporations and food companies especially, so that you're prepared to handle any situation. Training, in my opinion, begins with employee education and answers the following questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how. And then to develop customized training course. And third, to identify, develop, and test anticipated what-if scenarios. These are all processes that a response team needs to be fully functional and trained in. After training, we then need to take a step called verification and review. Verification review is a test. Its purpose is to test the effectiveness of training and suitability of test scenarios. Unannounced tests are the most effective incident management training experience. Verification can be triggered internally or externally. The most challenging the verification, the stronger the system will be over time. And fourth, an incident can be viewed as a training situation. Whereas lastly, 5, internal team communication is the biggest incident team challenge, followed by gathering critical incident knowledge that can be used to develop a timely response. As I mentioned before, some of the food categories for risk management include the following: dry foods with they have a lower water activity, and generally products like chips, flours, and sauce or soup mixes fall into this dry foods category, and they have generally lower risk. And then as you move up into what they call intermediate moisture foods or high moisture foods, they have increase in high, what they call water activity. In other words, there's more free water, and when there's more free water and a higher moisture content, microorganisms tend to grow and proliferate much quicker and easier. Another consideration needs to be whether this food plant is either producing and selling refrigerated or frozen foods. Obviously, frozen foods has a lower risk factor compared to refrigerated foods, which have multiple organisms that can grow at refrigeration temperatures. Is the company selling product at room temperature? Does it sell highly perishable products such as produce? And then, are they canned foods? Well, canned foods, you control the risk or incident by monitoring the process, the heat treatment, and those type of products. Well, then you can have low pH and high acid foods that have lower incident risk, such as Tabasco sauce, or if some people like to use famous sauce. But these are low pH, high acid foods, very low likelihood that they'll have associated risk. And then you have susceptible meat products that are home to pathogen organisms such as E. coli and others. So this really represents the food science or chemistry of food safety, aside from the food micro, is to when you write, a company writes, or you're looking at a potential case, and you want to know, do they have the right incident programs in place for the type of products that they produce. I'm going to go through a couple personal experiences here. One was a company that I worked for that had soup contamination, and what happened was they were using a food supplier, a soup supplier, a sauce supplier. They made a number of products, and the manufacturing found E. coli contamination of a particular food product that was being made on the same line that they use at different times during the day to produce products for themselves. And so the food company that I was working for decided that even though there was no E. coli found in our food products, that the potential risk warranted withdrawal of our products from the marketplace. And so an incident response team was put together, and we evaluated the risk and decided to take the owner of the company actually decided to make the decision to pull all of our product from the store shelves. So the recall characteristics included in this was the restaurant chain notified 48 hours post-incident on a competitor's production line. Step 1 for our risk management team was activated at the 48th hour. The first goal was to determine the cause agent and impact on consumers. And in this case, it was E. coli, wherein death can occur from E. coli. In this situation, it didn't. And second was determine the recall scope, the product locations in the supply chain, the quantity at various locations or distribution centers, how much was left at retail stores, and what their product value was. The second step was to place product on hold that was manufactured both one day before and after the incident, was time-stamped, and throughout the supply chain and distribution centers and manufacturers. So we just had to put everything on hold. And then once you have put product on hold, sometimes that product is actually in a store. So we had to find a warehouse that would actually take and hold contaminated product, because even distribution center warehouses aren't interested in dealing with this at the time. Then the third step was to hire an independent E. coli consulting expert to troubleshoot to make sure that indeed we didn't have any contamination in our food, and then to hold the product in a secure inventory location. And lastly, step 5 was immediate plan of action to remove product from stores, log quantity and value for the replenishment. And step 6 was to restart product manufacturing with alternate suppliers until we really knew where the source of contamination was. and whether it had been properly cleaned and sufficient time had passed for new product to be manufactured. And during this time, we also, in step 7, I mentioned here, is we established a company spokesperson and had twice daily internal crisis management conference calls as a team. And then step 8 and 9 was to, in post-crisis situation, was return to a de-escalated incident management. In other words, get product made at alternate locations, get it shipped to the stores, get it in front of the customers, and try to de-escalate it down to a very non-event. What was right and wrong, and what are some unresolved issues? Well, since the soup was not affected, who pays for the soup? In this situation, the insurance company said, well, no, not really us, because you didn't actually have any contamination to your product. That's one question. Another was, what is the obligation of the soup supplier to reimburse the restaurant chain for brand value, drop-off, or inventoried product? And then thirdly is the manufacturer QA manager was fired. Was this justified when it had nothing to do with the products that my company was working with? And another question is, what about the tangled relationship between distributors, owners, relationships between manufacturers, and all these other things that have to be sorted out? And what are the obligation risks were presented when I talked directly to the supplier owner? Did that jeopardize his company? So, what I have in this slide presentation is a whole lot of legal issues that need to be thought through, that need to be addressed, and put into very simple language, because I guess what I'm saying here was a product recall. There was no contamination found. Preventative action on the part of the owner took place. And now what happens with who pays for what, and who's responsible for what, and how does that all get resolved? So there's plenty of work to go around to get that, to work on that resolution. Another experience, I was working for another restaurant chain during August of 2005 when Hurricane Katrina landed in New Orleans. Actual picture of it, but what was the food safety impact of Katrina? Well, in this particular situation, it was a restaurant chain where the restaurant stores were damaged or destroyed, resulting in risky, non-refrigerated, non-frozen food, which is clearly a public health risk. There was no electricity, there was no running water, distribution truck highway access was denied because a lot of highways in that part of the United States, as many of you may know, were closed down for only first responders, and so it was really hard to get in there to clean up the stores and to make them safe and secure again. Another impact for Katrina was that supplier poultry companies were damaged or shut down, and basically the supply chain closed in all these affected areas. So what were some steps that we took in this situation? First and foremost, we formulated a risk management team that was activated at the 48th hour. Team members assigned responsibilities, and we had daily, actually twice daily team conference calls for 2 consecutive weeks. Second step we did was to set up a food triage model to remove unsafe food from stores and supply chain. Third was to determine the state of supplier health and viability, and that was our poultry suppliers and others. And fourth was to set up a store delivery triage model, and then to set up the store and supplier payment process after the scope was established. So there were a lot of business processes that were damaged and broken in those situations. As far as tracking and tracing systems go, does one exist? The Food and Drug Administration requires a product tracing system to receive information that improves the capacity of the food processor and government to effectively, rapidly track and trace food that is in the United States or offered for import into the United States. And I might add, as we were just talking about Katrina, would be systems and processes in place that could be used for tracking down product that's been contaminated as results in natural disasters. And in order to improve the capacity to detect and respond to food safety problems, first, I recommend that we allocate resources to inspect facilities' imported food according to the known safety risk of the facilities or the food. And then secondly, to establish a product tracking or tracing system to track and trace products that are in the United States or offered for import into our country. Another way to improve the capacity to detect and to respond to food safety problems such as foodborne illnesses. In this situation, one needs to develop an improved epidemiological tool for obtaining quality exposure data and microbiological methods for classifying cases, and the automatic electronic searches for implementation and identification practices, including fingerprint strategy for foodborne infectious agents in order to identify new and rarely documented causes of foodborne illness and submit standardized information to centralized database. Some of the
Darrel, you're fading a little bit towards the end of each of your sentences.
Oh, okay.
Your sound's fading.
The next slide here I have is for incident gotchas, a checklist for attorneys when you work on different cases. And what I've listed here would be no incident management plan or program. In other words, look to see if a food company actually has a plan or program. And if they don't, it's a red flag. Another would be to look for incident management training programs that a company might have. If they don't, another red flag. And then to look at incident management practice events. If they don't, another red flag. Another thing is to look for the commitment of the executive team, or no communication plan, or no documents, processes, meetings, meeting minutes. All of these are something that could be gotchas to companies that don't have a program and process in place. So in conclusion, assume incidents will always occur. They will only vary in scope and safety and consumer safety impact. Secondly, be prepared to have an incident or risk management cross-functional team in place with a wide range of skill sets and a designated team leader that commands internal and external respect. A team is practiced in food safety incident dry runs of various causes. In other words, look to make sure they've had practice events. And then fourth, a team doesn't understand legal implications. And to document all team training facilities. And then lastly, I've just listed a few of the resources that I used in putting this presentation together to give those people credit. And that's the end of my presentation, and we're ready for questions.
Okay, great. For everybody in the audience, if you have a question for Darrel, please use the chat or Q&A feature found on the right-hand side of the screen. Darrel, since our last Q&A break, we've had a couple questions come in, and I want to address those at this time. During the second part of your presentation, you talked about documenting recall events as well as meetings and policies and procedures and all of that. We have a question here that says, if my client has documented product recall events, should they still have documented evidence of incident management company exercises?
Absolutely. There's not alternatives to practice, practice, practice. I mean, that's the key. But if practice events drive up the skill of the team members and encourages them to suggest new and better ways to execute those practices, that's the value of having practices. And another thing in the industry that we talk about a lot in food is mock recalls. And that is where we set up product recalls to just practice that. Well, the same thing needs to happen in incident management. And when I work or consult with different food companies, what I try to do is encourage them to have mock recalls or incident management that affect different aspects of their supply chain. And one of them might be recalling the packaging only, no food, just the packaging. And another one might be recalling just the ingredients that go into a finished product. So I absolutely believe in as much documentation and practice events as you can have.
Okay, great. With the advent of, or the boom of organic and locally grown and farm to table and all those sorts of things, as well as genetically modified food, can you talk a little bit how these types of companies and organizations, the distributors or the producers of organic, genetically modified, that sort of thing, how they deal with incidents as opposed to kind of the mainstream producers and distributors?
That's a good question, and I'll first preface that by making a comment that there's a big difference between natural and organic, and I think the definition of natural is pretty worthless in our country, just because there's no certification to guarantee that a product is natural. It's based on an honor system, so to speak. But when it comes to organic foods, they have certification processes to guarantee that product is actually certified as organic, and the USDA has a seal that they can put on their products and their packages from that standpoint. So there is a lot more documentation going on in organic food companies. And there's two companies, Oregon Tilt and another one, that have just joined forces. They were kind of the two certification agencies in the organic field. Over the past 12 months, they've joined forces to become one. And I think you're going to see a lot more additional focus and quality of training in the whole certification area of organic foods. It's very, very promising.
Okay, great. And a final question here. Who ultimately owns responsibility for the implementation and for the oversight of these incident management processes that you discussed during today's program?
My personal belief is that it has to be owned first and foremost by the CEO of a company. It's kind of amazing. I go through different food companies, and I could be at let's say a tortilla manufacturing plant of one company, and I could go to another tortilla manufacturing plant of the same company, and I can see totally different quality and skill levels and attitudes of workers in plants that are within the same company. And that tells me that there just isn't that commitment at the executive level and the CEO level that allows, because it's allowed to happen. And that's why I keep saying it has to start the CEO, because, they own it, and they're going to be responsible for it or go to jail if it's not done well. And that's where I think that I'm still not seeing the urgency yet that there needs to be, I don't think.
Okay, great. I don't see any other questions in the queue. So, Darrel, do you have any concluding remarks that you'd like to make?
I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to speak. It's an exciting area. It's an ever-changing area. And first and foremost, it's all about safety of our fellow citizens so that we can all enjoy life because we stay healthy and well. Thank you very much.
Excellent. And thank you, Darrel, for the time and the effort that you put into this presentation. And thank you to everyone who took an hour out of your day to spend with us this afternoon. Just very briefly, if you'd like to speak to Dr. Darrel Suderman about a specific matter that you're working on, you can contact us here at TASA. Our telephone number is 800-523-2319, or you can respond to the thank you for attending email that you'll receive at 3:30 p.m. today. That will go out from my email address, and you can just respond to it, and it'll get to me. Tomorrow morning, I will send out a link to the archived recording of this program, and in that email, I will include a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that was used by Darrel. The archived recording of this webinar, as well as all of our previous webinars, can be found in the TASA Knowledge Center. If you go to our homepage, tasanet.com, click in the For Attorneys section, you'll have a direct link right to our webinars. Our next webinar for legal professionals, New Requirements for Fall Protection, will take place next Tuesday, February 19th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll be discussing a new standard for fall protection on construction sites. If you have any follow-up questions or comments, please feel free to email me at mhyde@tasanet.com. We do take all of your questions and comments under consideration, and they help us to produce better programs. With that, I'm going to end today's program, and I hope to see you at future TASA events.